When you think about majestic church buildings and architecture, you probably imagine something from centuries ago. But what if I told you that some of the most spectacular church buildings have actually been built in just the last decade? Let's start with Knarvik Church in Norway. This is a parish church of the Church of Norway, which is a Protestant evangelical Lutheran denomination, the biggest church denomination in Norway. And the architects of this beautiful design actually won a competition to secure the privilege of doing the work. Capacity in the church is about 500, and the building was finished in 2014. The idea behind the design was a modern interpretation of a traditional Scandinavian church. So you've got the big spire, and then the exterior is all pre-weathered wood so that it already has that worn-in type of look, which makes sense when you think about the Norwegian climate and how the elements would take their toll on a wooden exterior. But, forgive me, I do find it a bit amusing just imagining these brilliant architects looking at wood samples and saying to each other, this one is too new looking, we need something pre-worn, like they're trying to track down some vintage Levi's. Nonetheless, the exterior is sublime. And then on the interior, there is a row of vertical windows that allow for sunbeams to come through and also to allow you to see the outdoors so that the inside doesn't feel too clinical. Let's move to Taiwan now to explore Tamkang Church, finished in 2021. This is a high-rise concrete building completed by German architects. It's a combination of a church and community center. And rather than following the typical cues that you might think of when designing a church, instead, these architects opted to have the 11-story building informed by the residential towers being built around it. In fact, the cross skylights in the roof and cross window, those are really the only visual cues that this is a church. Inside of the building, there are event spaces, lecture halls, congregational areas, play areas for children, a teaching kitchen, and on the top floor, another church hall for ceremonies like weddings and baptisms. The church is located just 500 meters from the coast, which makes for harsh weather conditions, very similar to the Norwegian church in that respect. And because of this, the architects decided against some of the decorative elements that are commonly seen in churches, instead constructing a tower that is illuminated at night, serving as a beacon in the dark, very much like a lighthouse. Here's how the architects described this project, and I think it's very illuminating what they have to say. Quote, "Churches in Taiwan play a different role in society than they do in Europe. The pastor of Tamkang Church once said that it would be a church where anyone would be welcome, and he wanted to put the focus on its role of social welfare. Thus, the Tamkang Church leaves more than half of its facilities to be used as a community center. The architecture must reflect on its social responsibility, bearing the cross to serve this land." A beautiful vision. They go on to say, quote, "All church buildings are built with the hope of interpreting the Christian doctrine. Because of the difficulty to acquire land rights and the crowdedness of metropolitan spaces in Taiwan, religious architecture in this country often ought to confront the distance between man and heaven caused by the vertical massing of buildings. Unlike European churches that are able to create sanctity through structure, the Tamkang Church also has to face the challenge of fulfilling the building code and floor area requirements, vertically stacking both the day-to-day and sacred spaces of the church. How to build a holy and sanctified place that embraces the love and compassion within the society is the most critical focus on the design of the church." Let's stay in Taiwan and check out De-Guang Presbyterian Church. Again, this church is in a high-density residential area, and so the church plays a vital role as community center along with being a place of worship. Also completed in 2021. The idea behind this design is very cool. Before the temple was built in the Old Testament, there was the meeting tent, right, where people would join for worship, and that was the inspiration for this design, a humble meeting place that harmoniously fits in with the community that surrounds it. The sanctuary is on the top floor of the building with light flooding in. Diana Tai, the wife of the church's pastor, said, quote, "The first time I stepped into this space, I smelled the scent of wood." On the first and second floors, you'll find semi-open staircases and passageways connecting small plazas, symbolizing the church's mission to serve the neighborhood. And then here's something really cool. Once the building was done, they had to make some modifications that were originally not part of the plan. So colored grill work from stainless steel screens were added to help with temperature regulation. But due to safety concerns, glass panels were then installed as railing on the inside. And so now, when the sun shines through that colored grill work and the glass layer, a rainbow appears on the floor. To quote Commonwealth magazine, "From dawn till dusk, this place of worship is now bathed in the 7 colors of light." Heading to South America now to visit Church of the Holy Family in the Brazilian highlands. This church design is 4 different buildings completed in 2022. The sanctuary of the church is a circular structure sunk into the landscape and reached by a shallow ramp leading downwards. The roof has ringed roof lights bringing natural light down across the interior walls adorned with wood. And then at the ground level there is a ring of narrow windows which creates a constantly shifting pattern of light throughout the day. This main sanctuary also sits above a small underground chapel, and then both of those meeting areas separately connect to the long linear building. And in terms of the architectural vision, the designers noted 3 fundamental premises. Quote, an architecture open to the horizon, the inseparability of public and private space, and the role of the landscape as a structuring and fundamental element. And of the commonalities that are coming up again and again in all of these designs, it's how there is this marriage between the church as a sacred place, but also there to serve the community. Not a closed-off church separate from society, but an integral part of it, which is exactly what you think of when you recount old church designs in the middle of the public square, right? And so I love seeing how that vision is being reimagined in these modern designs. Let's head to Germany now. Near Munich, you'll find Church of Seliger Pater Rupert Mayer, clad with 15,000 white, 3-dimensional ceramic tiles. The church gets its name from a German priest, Rupert Mayer, who was a leading figure in the Catholic resistance to the Nazis in Munich. And this project was completed in 2018. And when you enter the church, you head down towards the sanctuary through a room of 3 large light openings meant to represent the Trinity. On the exterior, there's a cross with a rooster on top of it looking east, meant to symbolize how as each day begins, we look toward Christ, the rising sun. The foundation of the church is stone, and when you contrast that with the pure white ceramic, that's meant to characterize the relationship between heaven and earth. You can see these 2 materials converging on the inside of the sanctuary as well, where heaven meets earth. And I can't help but mention the colorful board here for kids. On September 19th, 2017, there was a powerful earthquake in Mexico that reduced to rubble a 500-year-old church building, the Sanctuary of the Lord of Tula. And this is the reconstruction of that church. In response to the earthquake and with the idea of, again, creating a public space, the proposal for the church became this awning type of structure without defined limits between the interior and exterior. Practically, there are large gaps in the arches to allow for natural air and light filtration because the walls only actually touch the ground on the corners. And this also means no artificial lighting and no mechanical air conditioning systems. The floor of the sanctuary is a stepped floor running the entire length, which is very cool because it means that the overhead height is the lowest at the church's entrance and the highest at the altar. And this reconstruction project was completed in 2020. Finally, in South Korea, you will find Saemoonan Church, the oldest Protestant church in Korea, founded in 1887, and in 2019, they unveiled their new building, a 13-story building consisting of 2 connected towers, the taller of which is a modern take on a steeple and is topped with a suspended cross that contains a small chapel and observatory. The main chapel is set in a large multi-floor auditorium lined with warm wood. This church is often called the Mother Church because it was the first Protestant church in Korea, and so part of the design's proposal was for the structure to resemble a mother's outreached arms. The architects designed the church to have a modern form, rejecting a traditional Gothic appearance to represent the church's current position in the country and culture. Quote, Protestantism was derived when Martin Luther started the Reformation, and so representing a transformation of Gothic style is important. Now I have a question for you. Of these 7 modern church designs highlighted in the video, which one would you want to meet in the most? Perhaps the modern take on the traditional Scandinavian church, or the indoor-outdoor awning sanctuary in Mexico, or maybe one of the hybrid buildings that serve as both community center and church, like Tamkang Church in Taiwan. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and if you like this video or any of the church's designs, show some love by giving the video a thumbs up. It really does make a huge difference for me. As for the video you should watch next, if you enjoy church design, check out this one on the best church logos, not from highly affluent churches, but from churches you probably never heard of before. I'll see you there.